Hello everyone. This is Vin Zeeland, and I am the guide for the Culture Strategy podcast. And today I have a wonderful guest named Dr. Jenny Gray. Met her through a connection through Brandy Shade. She has just been wonderful to talk with behind the scenes, and we've had a pre-interview interview, which was really fun. Really happy to have Dr. Jenny Gray. As you all know, this podcast is all about work culture. And we talk about the 7 pillars, and we can pick up on any one of those pillars. Just as a reminder, we're putting people first. We're looking for authentic leadership. We talk about open communication within the organization, building trust, and then also having healthy conflict, what that looks like, adaptability to change, and organizational resiliency. So Dr. Gray, I want to thank you for coming on the show, taking the time to give us some insight and some wisdom, and just to be helpful to the listeners and what they're looking for in a healthy work environment.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it. It's good to be here and be able to talk about some of my experiences and how I conceptualize organizations and organizational culture as well, and the dynamics and underpinnings that you just spoke about and how they really help create the outcome and good product, i.e., results and financial results for organizations when they really attend to their organizational culture. Let me start, if you don't mind. I'll just give a quick background of who I am. And so my avenue to get to where I am has been not a straight line. It's been a circuitous route. And after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I went out into the world, and I spent 10 years in corporate America supporting salespeople on specific products. Back in those days, I hate to date myself, but back in those days, super mini computers and things like that. And I was a subject matter expert. And then I decided I wanted to go back in. My degree was in psychology, and I decided to go back into psychology, that I wanted to build on that. And so I got my master's degree and then my PhD. My goal was to become a psychotherapist. So I took the clinical route. And so I got out and did 3 years independent, and I just was not having fun. So as here I am clawing my way out of corporate America, and I realized I needed to claw my way back in. Yeah. So I went and worked for a management consulting firm that had a lot of industrial / organizational psychologists on staff. And I had some classes in organizational psychology along the way. I definitely had some conflict. If you look at the title of my dissertation, it's Lifestyles of Women Who Emerge as Leaders in Small Group Settings. And here I am, clinical, wanting to do marriage and family counseling. So there was, I was already conflicted way back then. I just didn't realize it. So long story short, I got trained through that firm. I went out on my own for 5 years and had clients and some colleagues working with me, partnering with me. And then one of the CEO clients called me and asked if I would come and resurrect some projects we had done 5 years earlier. So I went and we discussed it, and I ended up working for him for 13 years inside a Fortune 750 publicly traded company. And I stood up their organizational development department from end to end. And it was nice because I was able, since there was nothing there, and I had to start from scratch. I got to integrate everything and make sure that it all worked together to support the culture that the CEO had envisioned and wanted to produce in that company, which was to transform it in many ways. So I was really fortunate to have that experience.
That's awesome. So I did my second undergrad bachelor degree in psychology, and I wanted to go on for my master's and then be an LPC and be family therapy as well. And I was talking with my academic advisor, and he said to me, he said, I see that you did a minor in communications. I said, absolutely. He said, did you notice that you did way better on your communications classes than you did in your psychology? He said, you did great in your psychology, but your GPA just shot up. And I said, yeah. And he said, can I make a recommendation? I said, sure. He said, get into strategic communications. He said, it's a fast track for the master's, and you'll enjoy it a whole lot more. And then you don't have to worry about all those hours. And then I became introduced to Don Clifton's work with the strengths. And then I realized I had this moment where I realized, do I want to deal with people's problems, or do I want to help them understand who they are and their strengths and be a coach rather than a therapist? And I decided to be a coach. And that's what this is all about.
It is. And that's a great way of describing, I think, exactly what happened to me. Is I am really an agent of change. That's who I am at the core. Yeah. And doing psychotherapy, people weren't moving very fast, and many of them were not motivated to get out of their dis-ease, if you will, right? And so I wanted to go work with what I call the walking wounded. They're the ones who are out in corporate America, striving, performing, going up the corporate ladder, and they want help. They want assistance doing so. And that was the group that I ended up working with over my 25 plus year career in organizational development, and found it more rewarding. And that's what I hear you saying. It was more rewarding to work with the strength side.
Right. Yeah. So we talk about Maslow, right? Mm-hmm. He said, when you get to that place where you get past the basic needs, and you then find yourself in a place where you're feeling fulfilled, and it's that hierarchical need of fulfillment. And that's what this is all about, is helping people discover, hey, what are my strengths? Where do I fit? Because, hey, look, 90,000 hours of work, 1/3 of your life is spent at your job. Do we want to be miserable, or do we want to actually enjoy the people that we live life with around us, right?
Right. We spend more time with our corporate colleagues than we do with our family over, our what I would call the productive years of, about 30 to 60 years of age, where we spend a lot of time at work or thinking about work or focusing on work over some of our family obligations. That's just reality. Unfortunately, most of us are, it's tough to balance it during that time frame. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So when you did that work, now I'm assuming that you're still doing some consulting work. I know that you were talking with me about, possibly writing a book, or you taking on that project. But do you do consulting work, and how have you helped, or how do you help organizations, put the emphasis on their culture in order to get that bottom line? Like, what is it that you do that you have found successful?
Well, I think what is most successful is when you have a leadership team or CEO, someone in the C-suite who is dedicated to making a positive culture, and that they understand that both the tangible and intangible benefits of creating that, because it takes their input, it takes their efforts to drive it. They have to be the role models, and they have to be the ones to articulate how that ties into the values and the purpose and the strategic mission of the company. So that, starting there is really the key. That I think if you go in too low into an organization, you're putting a Band-Aid on something. So culture will create itself. If you leave it alone, it will create itself. But is it the culture that is going to help you as a company achieve what you told the board of directors you want to achieve? And that to me is the big question that I ask senior leaders is, are you committed to that achievement? And if you are, it's going to take your involvement. And so, setting up a plan around them to help them understand and to coach them through the process. I never expect them to know exactly what to do to create the culture that they want. So I usually walk them through a process based on where they're starting.
Yeah. And so that's interesting that you talk about it's the leadership downward rather than pockets of lower level people. Now I know that Gallup talked about they have a book out called It's the Manager, and it's the manager that creates the culture. But I think it's the manager that reinforces the culture that the leadership wants to bring down from the top down. I recently wrote a paper. I took a class in my graduate degree, and it was on organizational behavior. And so obviously I took up the call to write a paper about culture, and then I created a video around it. And so one of the things I call it is the operational mindset. That operational mindset that looks at culture as sort of fluffy psychology. But is it really fluffy psychology? Is it that, or is it something deeper and more powerful and more potent and impactful?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I don't believe that culture is the nice to have. I believe a culture that's aligned with your strategy and has leadership at the helm and has people first and has process procedures, the operational components that support it, along with the final accountability, i.e. goals and performance reviews, all ties it together so that it works like a well-oiled machine. And, it takes multiple components to make that culture work. It has to be a living organism every day. I think, yes, a manager needs to be the supporter and the flag bearer of creating the culture that the leadership has decided they want. Because sometimes what happens when we say managers at all levels are responsible for culture, they create silos because they are creating in their box of responsibility a set of norms, right? A set of how we behave every day. Yeah. And I've seen this where the company I was telling you about that I worked as the OD leader for 13 years, we had 18 business P&Ls with 18 business leaders. Wow. And so each one of those leaders could make their own decisions and would many times create the culture they wanted. So my job was to help tie all those people together. Sure. and work with this, what the CEO was wanting and talking to the board about, and getting all of them on board so they could get their managers to then create the culture, and then their supervisors who could create the culture, right? So it needs to be a cascading effort.
Yeah. So that brings up a good point, because when you talked about creating that culture and that the leadership, so you talked about silos. What about the leaders that want the yes men or the yes women, and creating an echo chamber of yeses? So what's the difference, say, where you're casting a vision of good, healthy culture and implementing that, reinforcing it, versus somebody who's just a dominant, powerful leader who says, do it because I say so, and they go, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. You know, how do you help leaders discover the ability to be leaders versus, say, bosses? That's probably a good distinction.
It's a good thing to define. And I look at leaders as the people side of the business. You know, they are the ones setting the tone. They're the ones, obviously, they're responsible for the outcomes and the results, right? And setting those strategic visions and the goals. They're then, I think, responsible for how is the tone. And so when I think about culture, I'm sorry, I forgot about the manager, excuse me. So when I think about a manager, because you mentioned manager earlier,
Sure.
Managers manage process, procedure, functions. They're not, management is not about people. It's about the procedural policy, right? And holding people accountable to those things, setting them and holding people accountable. Leaders are the people side of the business. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have both in the same person. You can, right? It's putting one hat on for management, and now put another hat on as the people side of the business. So then I think about, okay, well, if you're going to put your leadership hat on, you know, are you using behaviors that are consistent to the culture that you want to build? So if you want a command and control culture, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with a command and control culture, if that's what works for you in your industry at this time in the world, right? And you're getting that's who you are and what you want, that's okay. If you want a more people-centric culture, then behaving as a do it my way is inconsistent. And so what you're going to get is not a people-centric culture. You're going to get a command and control. So it's the leadership. Everybody looks to the leader and behaves accordingly to the tone that the leader sets. So I think coaching somebody through that and helping them understand that is really important. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had a similar experience in my career where there was a gentleman who was heavily into sports, and he grew up in football, played football in college, and believed that the rough language, if I hit you hard, then you'll get better, that was his belief system. And so to get him to see that not everybody responds to that kind of coaching type of leadership, that they need a different kind of leadership. And so walking him through, there's multiple ways to lead. And if you find somebody that needs that rough, I'm going to yell at you to get you to be better, okay. But recognize that when you have a young lady who is 25 years old, getting traction in her career, yelling at her is not the best way to get strong performance and engagement from her, right? She grew up with football. She doesn't know what a football coach says and does inside the locker room and outside on the field. It's different, right? I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying some people don't respond to it. So you're not going to get the best performance out of people using one type of leadership.
And that's where you have to be, as you mentioned earlier, a subject matter expert. I liken it to individualization. It's looking at the individual. There's that golden rule of, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, what if I don't treat myself well? Well, then I'm going to treat other people not well. However, there's a healthy way of handling individuals is, how do you want to be treated? I want to treat you the way you want to be treated. And when we take the time to build that open communication and ask for that feedback, like, hey, what motivates you? Help me to understand how I can help you. What are your personal goals? What are your professional goals? There's a lot of ability. Just one conversation will make a world of difference. I've actually done it in my own world as a coach and as a consultant in training and developing others. It's just one conversation can turn somebody's career around, and they will perform so much better for you if they know that they can trust you.
Yeah. And I think that's important when you're talking about a leader who has a team of people that they're responsible for getting results from, and creating team effort, creating individual performance. I definitely am on board with what you just said. I do think about leaders higher up in the organization and thinking about, leading by walking around, right? So observing, taking the time to observe what's going on, and are behaviors, do they exist as symbols around the company, around everybody's desks, around the offices? Are the symbols consistent to what you are trying to communicate at a higher level, at a larger scale? And so sometimes I think when, for example, a leader goes and has to do a town hall or wants to do a town hall, does them maybe on a quarterly basis. And so they talk to the masses. So let's say they have 2,500 people in their business. They're talking to 2,500 people. It's hard to get to know every one of the 2,500 people. And I wouldn't suggest that they take the time to do that. That's, they don't have the time to do that. So what they say to the large group matters. And I think it's important to think about what that is and to articulate it in such a way that the majority can feel like they're being inspired and like they can connect with this leader and they're willing to go into battle with this leader. And then knowing that leader, knowing his or her immediate team at the level that you described is a parallel.
Yeah. And that's something that I have noticed that, as you mentioned, leaders don't have the time. One of the suggestions that I made to a leader one time was, he was a president of a company and he had, higher levels above him. As I said, how hard would it be to have a town hall, say, for 15 minutes every week, just from your level? Take 15 minutes, you're getting feedback, everybody's reporting back to you, you're seeing the numbers. Having a 15-minute Teams or Zoom meeting and highlighting your top 3 performance people, doesn't have to be the same people every week, but calling out different things, and people then see, oh, they're taking notice of me, and people love that kind of feedback.
Yeah.
Or even having a lunch once a week where the teams get together with 5 different people within the organization and just have a video lunch and get to know each other from different departments.
Yeah. And again, I think it depends on the culture that you are working to create. And those are great examples of the symbols that is, how do we do a meeting? What are our expectations? Do we go to lunch together? Do we go to lunch? Do we take lunch? Do we eat at our desks?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, those are all about the culture. And I'm thinking about cultural change. If you're going to make a change and you're all of a sudden going to shift your symbols, right?
Yeah.
You are going to lose some people. And that's just natural attrition because, currently you have a culture, whether it's the right culture or not, to get your outcomes and results you want, you have it. And so transitioning to any kind of culture, you're going to lose the people that love the way it is, but you're going to gain people who now are in alignment with your culture over time. So there's a plus and minus. I never want to lose good producers in particular, but things like that, like how do we give people recognition? How do we show that people matter to us? Do we have fun?
Yep.
Or are we serious all the time, right? And so and everybody needs something different. And that's something that even I learned as a leader of people is I'm not the best at having fun. Fun for me.
Come on, you're fun.
Yeah, fun for me is different than fun for other people. And I learned that, the way you have fun. And so you're right. Like, how do you have fun and how do you celebrate? That's another indication of your culture. Celebrations. Do you celebrate? The company that I worked for did not celebrate because the CEO himself didn't like to celebrate because he had something in his mind that said celebration means resting on your laurels. And that was so you think about belief systems, right? We all have belief systems that are driving how we behave and how we show our culture and what is important. And that's what was important to him. Don't celebrate too long. So having leaders who did exactly what you said earlier of putting people's faces up there, which I think is a lovely idea, and saying, I want to thank Jim this month because Jim did X for us. And that X needs to be aligned with the culture and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, the outcome.
Yeah.
So going back to the CEO who didn't want to rest on his laurels through celebration. So how would you advise someone like that to understand that, yes, this may be your mindset, this is your view, but if you take the time and realize that it could actually bring rest and it could actually bring up the morale of the workforce, the people who are following your charge, how do you help them, or how do you communicate that to someone like that in that situation?
Yeah, and this is the time in a conversation I wish I had lots of my PowerPoint slides in front of me. I tend to be a data person, and so I usually research things like that and look for, at PwC or Deloitte, and I look for papers and data, white papers or studies that show the ROI, something tangible that a CEO, a COO can understand. That's money, right? It's money. that when you improve engagement and things that you do to improve engagement, you get this percentage of performance improvement, which results in X dollars. That's where it matters to the C-suite, when you can connect it into the outcome.
Yeah. So what's my return? What's in it for me? And what's the return on the investment, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I know, and I've read a lot of those papers, and the conclusions are really fascinating. Seems that in the Fortune 500s, when you have companies that are engaged, and they build that culture, that foundation of a good, healthy collaboration, it creates innovation, and then that innovation brings a greater return. Then they become companies that are socially responsible, because now they're not just looking at the inward of what they're doing for, say, themselves and for the company. Now they're impacting their community around them in their world. And I find those numbers fascinating, because now there's an overflow. So you talked about that in our pre-interview about the spillover effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a good opportunity to maybe dig deeper into that psychology of the spillover effect. And that's the correct terminology, right?
Yes, that is a correct terminology, spillover effect. Yes. And, it's interesting because I found an old paper of mine that I wrote in, I think, a senior year in my undergrad, and it was on stress and the spillover effect. Again, I wish I had all this data. I'm that type of person that I'm dependent on what things that I've created, and I don't have them here in front of me. I'm not that person who can just rattle off all these people and titles and years. But the spillover effect, when I was first introduced, it was through stress management, and that term of that when you're stressed at home and you come to work, that stress spills over into your job, and vice versa. If you get stressed at work and you go home, guess who the first person is that you bark at? And you tell your story, and you're animated in your story. And that frustration or anger or whatever it is that created stress for you now is in your home. And that energy is in your home. And so it goes both ways. And so I think if you can create a good environment where you're handling stress or you're handling conflict constructively, and you are putting people first, and you're creating a meaningful environment for them in which they can flourish, that's going to spill over to home. And it's going to spill over then into their community, the people that they interact with on the weekends. And everybody, it's like raising all boats, right? The tide that raises all boats. So yes, an organization, while they think they're encapsulated and they're doing what's right for them, their vendors are feeling it. Their suppliers are feeling it. Their customers are feeling it. So think about a customer service center. So if you have disgruntled employees in your customer service center, they're not going to be providing the representation of your company in the best light or in the light that you intend. Right? And so
the Google reviews start coming.
Yeah. Exactly. And someone got a bad one from me recently. Yes. Yeah. So, but that feedback is good, right? I think those Google reviews are good because you can get a 5-star and you can get a 1-star within the same month. And at least, you have something to read and compare against. But not, I think that's exactly what's happening.
And you talked about attrition, right? So you talked about the stress and all that. How does the stress lead to attrition? Because attrition is one of the highest costs. I had a entrepreneur who built his whole real estate business on culture. And he said the first 5 years, he had zero attrition. You know, he said, if I'm going to build a company, I want to build a company where we can do life and we can then see and reap the rewards and harvest of being profitable. So I don't have to pay money for marketing, and I don't have to pay money for unemployment, or I don't have to pay, severance and whatever other costs come with the attrition. And I look at a lot of companies when I research and I review, I go, wow, less than a year average in stay in tenure. That's insanity to me. and then they, anyways, they're all like, the people are saying 2.0% or 2 stars or whatever that is. It's fascinating to me that companies would not take the time to look at that and say, how do we pivot? So, I'm always careful about advice, but if you were to give instruction or some advice in a situation like that, a company that's really growing fast, that could be through acquisitions or something of that nature. And I always point to acquisitions because those are the most stressful cultures. You're bringing two together. What would you say? Like, how do you look at that and say, you know what? It's better to get that spillover through doing culture. What would you say to them? What's the advice you would help them with if they're in that situation?
Well, I think the first thing is to be intentional. What is it that you want, and be very intentional about that. You talk about fast growth and or acquisitions. I believe it's about 76% of all M&A fails to achieve the original financial gains that were intended. That's a big number. It's a huge number, and yet there's very few people, leaders in particular, I say leaders, who are tackling that and who hire people, organizational psychologists or coaches of some sort who do this work to help them get the two cultures together quickly beyond processes, right? How do we do the payroll? How do we get, all the IT done? The functional stuff is always done. It's the people side of the business that they think if we just leave them alone, let's leave them alone for a year and everybody will be okay. And then they'll slowly get the way that the acquiring company does things. And that doesn't really happen. That people aren't wired that way. If you leave me alone, then I'll come your direction. That's like you just abandoned me. You just abandoned your baby. And now you want me to do it your way, do things your way. People tend to dig in their heels in those kinds of circumstances.
I smell a rebellion.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I tell you what, every one of us has a 14-year-old stuck in our body who is going to rebel, right? I mean, we don't get rid of that part of us. It stays with us and comes out at the most inopportune times. So yeah, those are stressful times. And I think leaders need to be calm. Leaders need to have a presence. They need to know where they're going. They need to be very unforgiving about where they're going and be clear, have clarity. It's all about clarity. It's not about certainty, because you can't be certain about what's going to happen because you can't predict the future. You could just be prepared for when it comes. So, but certainty is important to provide, and that takes intentional thought. You talk about strategic communication. It takes strategic communication to do that well. And so the example you gave earlier of the company that didn't have any attrition that was growing, I bet I would wager money that that company has a system in place. They have a competency model, whether it is written down or verbalized only. It is a model by which they're filtering people in and keeping others out. And that's how, and they're treating people a certain way that they told them in the interviews they would treat them a certain way. And they're following through with that through all of the mechanisms in the organization that touches that employee. So, yay, congrats to them. I mean, that's a great success story. And it's great when you could start from scratch. It helps when you can start from scratch.
And you bring up a good point. You actually hit it right on the head. And he told me, he said, it was very intentional. And he said, I put the processes and procedures second, but the people first. And then he said, of course, I put in processes and procedures. He goes, but that came after we built the dynamic culture that kept a unified group of people. I always use the word congealed, right? They're starting to firm up and come together and grow together. It's fascinating because he did say that he saw 50 and 60% year over year. He said, no, that's not sustainable over time, but year after year, 50 and 60% growth years. And some of his best years were COVID. Wow.
Wow. Yeah, so I think that's a segue to, it doesn't matter what's going on in the economy. It doesn't. And I speak to leaders about this all the time. You know, there'll be a leader that says, oh gosh, we're going into recession, so I'm not going to be able to make money. Yeah. Really? You can't make money in a recession. Let's talk about that. Yeah. You know, let's talk about why you think right? It's back to the mindset and the belief system you have that you can't make money. And let's then talk about the people and what are you going to do to retain your people during tough times? Because you mentioned organizational resiliency early on in our conversation. And part of that is building a team in such a way that they can, and the leader in such a way that they can make it through difficult times and do so with positive outcomes, both. And it may be that your balance sheet is neutral, but you've cut costs because your attrition rate has gone down. And you think about attrition can be a good thing. You know, if it's people you aren't high performers, you might be okay with that attrition. Especially if it's during a recession and you're not going to replace that role until times are good. But you don't want to be losing your key people, the people who are behaving in such a way that they are leading the values and the normative expectations that you want. You know, if they're drinking the Kool-Aid, you don't want to lose that person, right? And you're right. And nutrition can be very, very expensive. So keeping any of those kinds of costs low is important. And how much does it cost to have a Zoom party, or how much does it cost to have a town hall you mentioned this leader, every week for 15 minutes? You know, it's not that costly to do small things that make people feel good, and you're creating an environment that is good for you. And whether you care about anybody else or not, whether you care about the community, whether you care about the globe or not, it's happening anyway, without your conscious effort. So just good for you for creating your environment that is so good that you're making it through tough times. You're creating resiliency in yourself and in others. Leadership is tough. I worked with a leader recently, and she said, I'm going through tough times, and all this negative stuff was happening to her, and it was. I mean, things were piling on her. And she said the thing that bothered her the most is that she had a saboteur, a person on her team that was sabotaging her behind the scenes. And I said to her, welcome to leadership. That means you were actually being a leader. If you were being sabotaged, you were being a leader. You have to expect the saboteur is around the corner. And and so that's okay. You need to lead through it. Lead through it. That's part of the creating the culture. You might have somebody who is creating that insurrection in the company, and you just don't know it, and nobody's told you. It's okay. It's how do you lead through it? How do you work with it? How do you deal with all the negativity and degradation of your culture that you were trying to build? And that's what we did.
Time, right? So what you're saying is I think that's important. So in pointing that out, that as a leader, you're going to be a moving target as long as you're moving, right? You'll have shots fired at you from the bow, but how you handle it and how you handle your people will show your character, your integrity. You may have to sit down and say, this is going to be a difficult conversation, but this is what we want. This is what we need. And you're either on board or you're out, right?
Yeah.
And
that's a tough conversation to have right there, right?
Sure.
And doing it in such a way that it's respectful
Mm-hmm.
to the person and does not suggest they're wrong, but there's just a misalignment. Misalignment. And so that, to me, is a leader's key responsibility as building the culture, is creating that alignment up and down the organization. So if they're not at the C-suite, then they're maybe one or two rungs down. They still need to manage up. They still need to align and push any alignment up they can, and take any alignment down that they can or they should. So yeah, it's tough being a leader. It's not easy being a leader. People think that's the easy part, and actually it's the very difficult part.
It's stressful. Yeah, they may be paid well. Most times they may be paid well, but there's a lot of weight on their shoulders because, I liken it to climbing that wall. I think we talked about this, El Capitan. In most positions, the leader's standing at the top, looking down, and they're trying to send that message from the top down, where I think if you run the business right, if you're engaged with your people, you're going to be transparent, you're going to be authentic, people are going to know you. If you're engaged with your people, it's kind of like farming. You pull the weeds where the weeds come up. It's hard work, but you'll definitely reap the harvest of your crop.
Yeah. And, it seems like that should be easy, to be authentic, to be open, to be approachable, but it's not for everyone. And, because being a leader means you do have a target on your back, sometimes you don't know who to trust. You don't know, the kinds of conversations that could be career damaging. There's a lot of politics going on. If we talk about the top, it's all politics. So when I talk to a director who gets promoted to a VP, that's one of the first things we talk about, because That's one of the first things that they see suddenly is they go, oh, as a vice president, I'm seeing games being played. I'm like, yeah, it's a finite number of resources. There's, people are playing all the games they can to get the resources they can to make the numbers that they are expected to make. It's not easy. So, to be authentic, to be open, to be willing to have people come at you and have the presence and articulation, the communication capabilities to handle that and to know exactly what you can say and what you can't say is critical. Yeah.
So it's running the gauntlet. Sometimes you're going to get hit with a good hard blow. And you may get knocked off, but I think there's an old proverb that says, a good man, a right man, or woman, could be both, will fall down 7 times, but get up every time, right? And they may get knocked down intentionally, but you get back up and you lead the charge and you just keep fighting.
Yeah, exactly. Resiliency is, in the literature, is coming up to be one of the critical factors that can be a predictor of success. Not only success of a leader, but the success of an organization. When an organization gets knocked off its feet because there's a new innovation that came out of nowhere, then like COVID did for many businesses, right? It just shut some businesses off and other businesses started up and flourished. So it changes the landscape. And when the landscape changes suddenly, an organization has to move and work with that landscape, and leaders have to be the ones taking charge of that, right? Being the ones who are, while they're on the peak, and leading the charge, they're also authentic in that process and bringing people along and bringing the organization along in a intentional, organized fashion. And again, that's another opportunity where a culture may have to change because the landscape of the company in which it's operating has now changed. And so leaders understanding and being comfortable with managing that change. So managing change becomes another competency that a leader has to have. I want to talk a little bit about innovation because sometimes when I think about managing change, I think about innovation, even though they're distinct and different. But you brought it up earlier, and yes, how, to be open and authentic, it takes that, I think, to be open to hearing new ideas, to accept other people's perspectives, to look at a perspective that is in complete opposition to your perspective, and at least listen. Listening is powerful.
I always say you have 2 ears, 1 mouth. And even though I'm high in communication, so I'm talkative, but I'm also an ideator. And like you, we both share a lot of commonality with being a strategic thinker. And sometimes those strategic thoughts with somebody who, when you see 10 steps ahead, others have a hard time digesting that big pill, and that's fascinating because there's a fine line, right? We have to be able to see ahead. Have you ever seen the show Stranger Things?
It doesn't ring a bell.
Well, there's a scene in which these 2 teenage kids find some truth in their community, and it's a big story. And they bring it to an investigator who's been kind of following this, trying to figure it out. So they bring it to him, and it's a funny scene where he goes in his kitchen and he pours himself some vodka, and he's drinking it straight. And he puts it down and he puts some water in it, He drinks it again. Still too strong. So he puts a little more water in. And then he goes, it's just right. He said, you have to take that story and dilute it so that it's palatable.
Yeah.
And I think for people like us, we're very strategic. We tend to bring the truth head on. It's a little too strong or potent sometimes, right?
Yes, it is. I usually preface that I'm about to do that when I'm talking to someone, just so they can get their defenses up and ready to go, so it doesn't just like, whoa, it hit them. But yes, we tend to do that based on our strengths, which is great. Strengths can be taken too far, as you and I know. You have to know when to use your strength and when to hold it back. And I know I have not held it back at times where I needed to. And I have been told by bosses through the years. So it's okay. I don't mind hearing it. But yes, I'm with you. So what it reminded me of is leader assimilation. So if you have a opening at a very high level, someone who is leading a department, a functional department, let's say IT, leading HR, leading finance, leading engineering, they're the top one in that function. When you're putting a leader in at that level, especially from the outside, who doesn't know your culture, that has been one of the areas that I spent a lot of time with, is helping them acculturate in. And because they were brought in, I'm talking about multiple companies that I've worked with. I'm not singling out.
Grafting them into the vine.
Yes. And so I'm not focusing on any one company, because I've done this multiple times, has been the reason they were brought in was because, like we're talking about, they have something different that we don't yet have and we need. But that can be so far away from what the group is used to, and the way they're thinking and their development level of thinking. And you bring in a leader with this development level of thinking, and then you have to close the chasm, right? And this leader wants... Right. That's what you want to do. And so how do you do that, right? Because you can't just say, now it's this way, because guess what's going to happen? These people are going to either dig in their heels or they're going to leave. Some people will come up to it, but not everybody. So it's really helping those leaders understand how to come down to where the people are today, knowing that's what they're doing and being intentional about it, and then bringing them up. Stair-step them up, right? So that it's an incremental pop. It's not an overnight pop of, oh my gosh, back to deer in the headlights because Jenny and Vin just threw out their strategic communication at you, right? It's the same thing. So it's helping them understand how to come to the situation and meet people where they are, and then take them on the journey.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fun and fascinating. And so as we're getting ready to close out here, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just give some final thoughts and share how people can connect with you. We're going to be publishing this first season shortly. And so I wanted to, give you an opportunity to say what you're doing, where they can connect with you, whether if you linked it or if you have a website, and how you can serve their community, because this is not just about promoting my podcast or my service. This is about promoting thought leaders and people who really are heavily invested into elevating others into their best role and into their best opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that opportunity to close it out that way. For me, I can help an organization put in evaluate where they are on their culture, see where they want to go, and help them close the gap in these differences through the elements that we talked about today, through the leadership, through the symbols, through the people, the focus on the people, through the operational processes, and through the follow-up of accountability processes. So I can do that. I can also provide one-on-one leadership coaching, if you will. I've been building, what I like to do is help companies build remarkable leaders for remarkable outcomes. And that's what I really love to do. And so I'm happy to work with leaders to help them in their journey to build a great culture to achieve their vision. You can get in contact with me via LinkedIn, and it's Jenny Gray. It'll come right up. Jenny Gray, PhD, is if there's more than one Jenny Gray. I don't think there is, but if there is, it's Jenny Gray, PhD. And also my email. You're welcome to email me, and it's D as in dog, R as in Robert, .gray, Gray, at Verizon.net. So dr.gray at Verizon.net. So those are two ways you can get in contact with me, and I'd love to help. Either way, help an organization get the culture that they want and transform their culture, or to help a startup build their culture, and or to help build the next remarkable leader for your company.
And you do some private coaching. Do you do that through Zoom, or how do you do that?
I do, because I coach people all over the United States right now. I have done some international. I do not speak other languages, however. It is English only, but yes, it's Zoom or Teams. I have a calendar link. If you send me an email, my calendar link is on my signature line, so I will return your message, and you can always sign up for an introductory call with me, and I'm happy to talk through what you're facing for no cost. And then if you'd like to continue to explore other issues and or opportunities for you, I'm happy to engage in a consulting contract or a coaching contract.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Jenny, it's been awesome. I'm so glad to have you here. Hope you're open to the future callback and bring you on. You have some really dynamic insight, and next season we're going to talk about leadership. And we're going to go through the 5 pillars of leadership and how that looks. So I'd love to bring you back, because I just think you just have a really, really cool insight, and just love to bring you back.
Thank you. I'd love to be back. And that would be a great topic. It's one of my favorite topics. And certainly I have a lot of opinions. So
as we all do.
Yes. So thank you very much. It was enjoyable being here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thank you so much. And with that, folks, this is Vin Zeeland. I'm signing out. And Dr. Jenny Gray, thank you again. I'll look forward to the next opportunity in connecting your culture to your business.
Welcome to Threadpool. We're an all-inclusive podcast factory. Podcast made easy. We operate with a done-for-you approach. If you have a great podcast concept, we can help make it a reality. In less than 8 weeks, we can have your amazing podcast fully produced, making you ready to share your podcast worldwide on all of the major podcast streaming platforms. Book a coaching session to see how we can work with you. We are Threadpool, revealing greatness.